Hi everyone, it's Matt with Mineral Stains. Today we're going to go over our how-to page. I want to do an instructional video so when you purchase our products, whether you're a homeowner or you're just a painter that's doing these jobs over and over. So the first thing is a building could be a couple years old, or obviously it could be 60, 70 plus years old. We don't know what the most likely history of the building is unless you have all the records for all the masonry work that's been done over the years. So we're going to pick on an older building. If the building is from the 1950s or 60s, we don't have an actual idea of how many times masonry has been touched up, redone, and so forth. So the very first thing you should be looking at when starting your project or your client's project is, what is the condition of my masonry? Is the mortar in a good shape, or when you're running your finger, is it flaky or flaking off, or you see part of a sand, for instance, fall off the mortar? And that's a good indicator that you need to have at the minimum of a spot tuck point, or at the very worst case scenario, you got to pull all the old mortar and do a full grind, which is obviously going to be more expensive. So brick and masonry homes are great. I'm a huge fan of it, but just like everything else, there's maintenance that has to be done at some point. And we get a lot of calls where there's a building that may be 50, 60 years old and we have no recollection of when masonry was done, if ever, if the masonry is still original. Most likely not, but if it goes beyond 30, 40 years since the last mortar has been completed, that's a good indicator that you want to have that checked before you do any brick staining. Second part is silicates, in this case potassium silicate. So all of our masonry stains, they work a little bit different than paints. When you apply with the brush, roller, or when you spray, a silicate is going to dry on the surface much quicker. However, it still takes about 7 days to fully cure. The other item I really want to touch on is you don't want to do touch-ups 2, 3, 4 hours later. You will most likely get a lighter color. So if you have a painter that's going around the entire building and doing touch-up, 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 you're going to be left with a bunch of circles or lighter spots because silicates dry completely differently. And when we put on our how-to instruction, stain it, don't touch it, wait 12 hours, and then reapply a second coat, there's a reason for it. Silicates work differently. Once they fully cure, it could be negative 40 degrees, it could be 150 degrees, let's say in Sedona, Arizona, and your wall is going to be perfectly fine. It's only during the curing stage where you have to be a little bit more meticulous when doing the application. When we put 87 degrees on the container, we also mean it. If you're staining at 90 degrees plus, and then even worse in direct sunlight where it's 130, 140 degrees on the brick surface level, you're going to burn our products. So it's going to look like it's drying very quickly, and then the actual colorant is really drying at a pace too fast, and ultimately it's actually going to be a lighter finish. So for that reason, when we put between 41, 42 degrees and 87, we're very detailed and specific about that. Also, you also want to work against the sun. So always try to work in the shade as much as possible, especially in the summer conditions, because even if it's 85 degrees or 83 outside, if you're working on the wall that has direct sunlight, it's going to probably get to 120, 130 degrees throughout the day. It's going to warm up probably by 2 or 3 p.m. So what you can do is the walls that are directly in the sunlight, you want to start in the mornings as much as possible and then work against the sun, and it's going to make it much easier for you. The other thing I want to touch up on is when you use a brush or even back roll and you have to stop. So if you got a potty break, a lunch break, you get a call, something happens, always tooth it in. So you got a mortar, 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 and mortar. You want to stop at the mortar joint if it's a brick stain, not like a precast or something else. In this case, let's just use brick as a reference. You really want to stop at the mortar on all sides. That mortar gives you like a transitionary period where you stop and then you continue from that spot. You don't see where you left off. So again, the analogy I always use is if you're staining a piece of wood and you have to take a break or you get a call, you're not going to stop halfway on the cedar board, come back about an hour later, and then continue, right? Because you're going to be left with that mark right in the middle. So think about the silicates as like you're staining a piece of wood, if you will. The other thing is, once it's stained, leave it alone, come back in 12 hours. So again, if you're a painter, installer, if you price out a job or you're trying to wing it and get it done in one day, and then you're doing multiple coats, it may work on the lighter colors. With darker colors, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure at that point because you probably underbid a job and then you're trying to get it done in a day. If you're a homeowner, again, if you skip the primer, which we get a lot of questions, you're going to have not as much adhesion. So then if the brick is soaking the product a little bit more, and then you end up putting another coat on the same day, you're not really adding any value because there's only so much that brick is going to drink on a daily basis. So just because you put twice as much product within 4 hours, you've simply just wasted the product on the second coat, and you're also encouraging that stain now to be a little bit lighter because as it's drying, you're putting another coat on top of a surface that's still fully not cured in that curing stage. And then what's going to happen is you're promoting that chance for, like, let's say use a slate or charcoal color. It may actually come out lighter. So what you want to do is apply it, back roll it, back brush it within 5 to 10 minutes, and then leave it alone. So even if you miss a spot, you could obviously get it within a couple minutes, but don't touch it up after 30, 45 minutes, especially during the summers when it's really warm and it's going to take a little bit time, and then the temperatures are going to be affecting the brick. And then same thing goes for winter. Sometimes you think that it's drying slower, and then you do another touch up. It could actually work the same way because on the outer level, the brick is taking that much longer to actually cure. And then when you touch it up 5 or 6 hours later, same thing could happen. So I would even say that during the fall and winter cycles, when it drops in the 40 degrees, and if it's like 36, 37 overnight, you really sometimes want to make sure that you wait a couple days on the second coat if you need to do it, because everything is just taking that much longer. And then the 7-day curing time may actually be about maybe 2 weeks if it's colder conditions, because that quartz crystal, as we call it, it has to harden about 3/8 of an inch in the brick cavity. And if the temperatures are throwing it off, it's just going to take that much longer for the product to cure. And there is latex acrylic paints out there that the manufacturer will literally put, it's going to cure within 25 or 27 days. So this is not something different from other products when it comes to the curing stage, but application to reapplication should be a minimum of 12 hours, and then the full curing process is going to be a minimum of 7 days. So if you're going to apply your sealer, you want to wait at least 3 to 4 days after you finish coat 1 and 2, for example. And then at best case, you may even wait up to 7 days where everything has been applied, fully cured, and then you're going to put the sealer over the actual area. And to touch on the final note, as far as the sealer is concerned, we strongly recommend, if you have a lower perimeter where you're applying salt, that's going to deter the pH over time. Any chemicals, landscaping products that you may spray, those types of areas are throughout the building or a single family residence, you really want to probably use our sealer, just because the silicates are between 11 and 12 pH. When you continuously put salt around the perimeter and then throw a little bit of salt and snow on top of the 2-3 rows of brick, for example, over time you're actually going to neutralize that wall, and then the pH is actually going to change, and it could actually form a flake off, or the product is going to start to fail. So if those areas are getting excess water, excess moisture, salt, you may want to protect that perimeter with our sealer. And our sealer is very easy to use. For 1 part of a quart gallon, 2.6 gallon, you're going to multiply it with 5 parts of that same size of water. So it's very economical, and you're most likely going to get about 7 years of protection using our sealer, which is also very high in water vapor transmission. Should you have any other questions, please reach out to us, info@mineralstains.com. Thank you.